Earlier this year, I read a book called The Experience Machine. And the guy who writes the book is a professor of cognitive philosophy. And it's a book, you don't need to read this book, don't write it down. It is a very difficult book, I don't recommend it. But it's a book about the latest kind of neuroscience and the latest theory about how our brains work. The gist is, for pretty much always, the way that we've thought about how our brains work is that our senses, our eyes, our ears, our tongue, like our senses, they collect information from the world and they send it into our brain, and our brain collects it and collates it and does the things that it needs to do with it to understand, so that the brain can understand what's happening out here. We see these things, we hear these things, it gets sent into our brains, brain understands what's happening. That's what we've thought since forever. And what that would seem to mean is that the neurons, the nerves, send info from our eyes into our heads, into our brain. And what we have found is that's exactly what happens. There are pathways that go from our eyeballs into our heads, and it goes that way. But then, in recent times, what they found was there are 4 times as many neurons that go from our brain to our eyeballs, which is not how it should work. The brain is it takes up, I think, 2% of us, and it uses 20% of our energy. So it needs to be very efficient and not waste too many things. Having 4 times as many neurons go from the brain to the eyeball than there is from the eyeball to the brain seems like a waste. That kind of neurological architecture seems wrong. And the latest theory is that actually our brains aren't perceiving machines, they're predicting machines. Your brain tells your eyeballs what it reckons should be out there. For a long time, we've known that our brains are not completely and totally trustworthy. We've known this since forever. Our brains aren't just recording pure info. Our brains are massaging and morphing the info as it kind of comes in. We've known that for a long time. We absolutely remember things that definitely did not happen. This is what we do. We construct things and merge things, and stuff's going on in there. In your booklet, on one of the pages, there's a page that looks like this. If you stare at this page and keep your eyes absolutely still and stare at that X and count to 50, let's say, after a while, the colors will start to fade, disappear. If you just stare at that X, don't move your eyes at all, it'll start to... Did you see this? Have you had? Then your eyes move and it comes back. This is called the Troxler effect. And your brain is telling your eyes, this is not important. Don't bother seeing that. We're just going to wipe that out. Isn't that crazy? Or try this. Close one eye. Close your right eye and hold your right hand out, and so you can look at the kind of tip of your finger. Then with your left hand, with your left eye open, add another one, put it out there, so you got 2 now. And while you keep looking at your right finger, move your left one just kind of straight out, maybe, well, for me, it's like this far, and my finger disappears. If I move it up a bit, it like pokes out, and then I move it left more, and it comes back. Do you see that? Does that happen? Can you do it? That is your optic nerve in your eyeball. That's where it's like hitting the back of your eye, so you can't actually see anything there. You are blind. But instead of there being just like a black spot there, your brain fills it in and says it probably looks like this, and sees things that it's not actually. Isn't that amazing? There's a million things like that. You're in all of this, your brain is trying to help you, right? It's not against you. It's trying to make things easier and, useful, so you don't have to think about stuff so much. But sometimes, as it's trying to be helpful, it ends up tricking you and is unhelpful. It's not trying to hurt you, it's just clumsy. And so what I wanted to do is unpack some of the ways that our brain tricks us that impacts the way that we lead. I want to share with you 7 common ways that our brain tricks us. And these are always the ways that our brain will trick. This is for everyone. It's not like some of us are immune to these things. This is everyone. This is the people that you lead. These things are happening inside their brains, and they're happening inside your brain. So if we can be tricked less often, then that will mean we will lead people better and be more helpful. So trick number 1 is what's called confirmation bias. You may have heard of some of these things before. There's a lot of information in the world. There's too many things, and processing all those facts from the ground up takes too much effort, too much time. It's way too consuming. So our brains latch on to facts that we already agree with, and they confirm the things that we already know. Confirmation bias. This then leads to faster decision making. There's all that info, right, out there in the world, and if there's this little bit of info and this experience or this story or this something, if that confirms what I already reckon, then we are way more likely to notice it. And then having noticed it, we're way more likely to grab that, put it in our pocket, digest it, add it in, integrate it to all the things we already think. In contrast, there's a bit of info out there that disconfirms, challenges the stuff we already think. We are very good at not even noticing it. And even if someone grabs it and puts it in front of our face, we have all these neurological brain tricks that we can use to write it off or to ignore it or to do everything we can to not change our minds. Changing our minds is a very difficult thing to do. You're thinking of buying a new car and you're kind of thinking maybe you would buy an MG. And suddenly, while you're driving, you notice all these MGs everywhere. It's like everyone else is buying them, and suddenly, there's MGs everywhere. What's happening is, everyone is not buying MGs. People have already bought them. And you just told your brain, hey, think about and find me MG stuff. And your brain is like, there's an MG, there's an MG, there's an MG, you're welcome. Right? Pointing them all out to you so that you notice them and confirm what you were already thinking about. That's the confirmation bias. And you can see how that would impact the way that you lead, I hope. If you think things are going well, then you will notice things that are going well. And you'll hear and you'll remember people telling you stories about things that are going well, and you'll remember them heaps easy and you'll be able to retell them. And you will not notice as much the things that are not going well. And you will ignore, or you'll sideline, or you'll easily forget comments about all the stuff that's not going very well. On the flip side, if you think things are not going very well, you will see all the things that are not going very well. And you'll remember those, and you'll remember the comments and the stories, and you'll easily retell them. And it will be harder for you to see the things that are going well. If you think that your boss is an idiot, or that she is selfish or out of touch or something, then you will be much more highly attuned to all the times that she is an idiot or selfish or not servant-hearted or all those things. And you'll be able to recall moments where she's been crap like that heaps easier and heaps more often. And it'll be hard for you to be able to think of, or you won't even notice all the times that she is clever and thoughtful and preemptive or servant-hearted or whatever. So how do you overcome this? Well, in one sense, you don't. This is just how it's going to be. But if you are aware that it exists, then you are 10 times ahead of the game. And you would seek disconfirming information. If you think it's going good, then you will seek evidence that maybe it's not. If you think it's not going good, you'll try to seek evidence that it is. And you will listen to and reward and not punish critics and whingers. Trick number two, the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error is where when you think about other people, their faults are attributed to something fundamental about them. Whereas my faults are explained by the unique circumstances that I find myself in. There's a mum at the shops, and her kids are screaming and they are off the chain. Well, that's because she's a bad mum and she doesn't know how to keep her kids in line and hasn't disciplined them properly. Whereas when I'm at the shops and my kids are crazy and screaming and having a tantrum, well, it's because my kids have something wrong with them. And they need some kind of diagnosis. These people, they turn up to church late because they're lazy and they're not committed. But I turn up to church late because I live so far away and I have very important things that I need to do. I have a phone call that I need to make, and I'm having people over for lunch after church, so I'm serving and getting stuff ready. I have very good reasons why I'm late. When other people do something, it's because there's something fundamentally about them that's wrong. But when I do the same thing, there's very good reasons and extenuating circumstances. And you can see how this would obviously impact the way that you lead and how you treat people. It would mean you are far less gracious with other people than you are to yourself. It would mean that you hardly even try to understand other people's circumstances anywhere near as much as you try to understand your own, which means you would potentially sometimes misdiagnose a problem and overlook an actual and easy solution because you think it's something fundamental in the people. That's very hard to change. So how do you overcome this? Well, the answer is you don't. But to be aware of it means you're 10 steps ahead. But what if, when you thought the issue was a fundamental attribute of the person, what if you intentionally just put that aside for a moment and try to think what else the issue might be and see if there's any evidence for that. And you can see how the confirmation bias and the fundamental attribution error, you can see how they kind of feed into each other and they make you as a leader much dumber. Trick number 3, declinism. Declinism is the kind of fancy way to say the old-fashioned seeing the past with rose-coloured glasses. It's when people view the past as the good old days and the future is only going to get worse. It means that you remember the past as better than it was, and you expect that the future will be worse than it's likely to be. You know you're dealing with a declinism person when people talk about the good old days. And when they talk about the golden era, if only we could go back to the 1950s when there was 200 kids at Sunday school and we had a bus that picked everybody up. Those were the good old days. If only things could be like that now. People talk, I don't know if this happens in your church or your school or whatever, but it happens in every church I've ever been a part of. People love to talk about the golden era, and I love it when they do, because it just helps me to know what to do with that person. The only thing that the good old days and the golden era tells you is that that person has a bad memory, and to be careful with how much you listen to them. Declinism is tied to the Rip Van Winkle person. All the new ideas from the person who's gripped by declinism will just be old ideas of what they used to do, but they'll have forgotten all the good reasons why they stopped them. There are people at my church where if next year is 1964, then they're ready to run a church fete and bring out their homemade jams, and they're going to help the church raise an extra $153. Trick 4, the mere exposure effect. There was a university where every day on the whiteboard there would appear strange words. We'll put them on the screen, just in the corner of the whiteboard, kind of like this. Sarakik, Rajeki, Kadurga, Nansoma, Zajonk. And sometimes it'd be all of them, sometimes it'd be a few of them, sometimes it'd just be one of them. Zajonk appeared more than the others. The professor never referred to them, never talked about them, they were just there, and the students were just confused the whole time. After 9 weeks straight of words like that just appearing on the whiteboard every day, the professor gave the students a survey with a list of 14 foreign words. 5 of them were the ones that had been on the whiteboard. And the question was, they had to assess which words they liked out of the 14 foreign words. And what the researcher, a guy called Rick Crandall, what he found was that the words that the students liked were the 5 words that had been on the board for 9 weeks. That's what's called the mere exposure effect. Merely being exposed to a thing makes you like it more. And the first guy who coined that term was a guy called Robert Zajonk. His name might feel strangely, weirdly liked by some of us in this room. But mere exposure effect means that people will much prefer the things the way they are. Not because they're good or helpful or strategic, but because they're familiar. And so when things change or when things are new and people are very mad or they don't like it as much as the old things or the old way, it means you don't need to panic. You just need to be patient and let the mere exposure effect kick in. And you can see it linking with declinism, because the past is long and I like it because I was there. And for leadership, it will mean that you like stuff that you are familiar with. You'll prefer people that you've known for a long time. You'll notice when people that you've known for a long time aren't at church, much more than you'll tell when the new person's not at church, because you're not as familiar with them, merely because you've been exposed for things for longer. That's trick 4. Trick number 5 is called anchoring. Anchoring is that we tend to accept the first piece of information that we learn about whatever it is, a given topic, and then we use that as a reference point, as an anchor, to then judge and choose the rest of what we learn. Classic piece of research was done in the US when people were asked what was the last 2 digits of their social security number, right? Totally random. 32, 92, 58, 04, just the last 2. And then next, they were shown a whole variety of products. Chocolate, vacuum cleaners, bottles of wine, just stuff. And they were asked whether they would be willing to pay the amount of money formed by the 2 digits of their social security number. So 34, $34. And then after so would you pay $34 for this bottle of wine? Would you pay $34 for this box of chocolates? Would you pay $34 for these flowers? Just stuff. And then they were asked, what is the maximum that you would pay for that item? And the people who had higher random social security numbers, they were willing to pay significantly higher for the items, every item, any item, than the ones who had smaller social security numbers, even though those were totally random and irrelevant to everything. They just acted like anchors. So if it was 92, would I pay $92 for this bottle of wine? No. But what's the maximum I would pay for it? It was a lot higher than the person who had 34. That's why they don't just say, this lounge costs $200. They say, normally 1,000, and then they cross it out and write 200. If they just wrote 200, you'd be like, what a ripoff. But because they've done 1,000 crossed out, now only 200, you're like, I'm saving. That's free money. That's why they do that. So this impacts your leadership because it can make it very hard to scrap plans or to change course once the direction has been set because you get anchored to it. Trick number 6, the availability heuristic. In World War II, the US was trying to work out, the US military were trying to work out for their planes where they should add some extra reinforcing armor. They couldn't armor the whole plane, too heavy, too expensive, but they could add it somewhere. Where should they add it? And so they collected all the data that they had on where planes were most frequently hit. When a plane returned to the aircraft carrier or whatever, and it was full of bullet holes and stuff blown off, where was that on the plane? And so it looked like this. We'll put it on the screen. It was basically this. That's sort of where all the bullet holes and damage was. So what they did was they added armor reinforcement to all those areas with the red dots to reinforce those bits where all the bullets had hit them. And then a guy called Abraham Wold, he pointed out that this entire approach was wrong. Because he pointed out this was all info taken from planes that had made it back to the aircraft carrier. They'd been blown apart, but they could still fly. Whereas all the ones that had been hit in the engines or the cockpit or that like skinny part of the end of the plane, they'd all not come back because they crashed in the ocean or on the ground or blown up in the sky. And so this meant that the military was reinforcing exactly the wrong areas. This is called the availability heuristic or survivorship bias. This is when you get results like 98% of those people who were surveyed said they enjoy filling out surveys. And it's like, yeah, of course, that's because everyone who hates it didn't fill the survey out, or like 2% of them did because they're like compliant people, but that information is worthless. And in leadership, you want to make sure that you try and take account of the information that's not present. And you want to make sure that you are collecting info that is complete and not just from those who have something to say or only those who like the thing or who don't like the thing. You'll hear about, the other church or the other school that does this thing and it works really well and so we should do it too. But you don't hear about all the places that tried that thing and it didn't work, all the schools that did that and they don't do it anymore because they don't talk about that at like conferences and stuff. And often, the thing that worked in that place didn't work because it's such a great idea, but it's because of all the other things in the context of that place that made that thing work, and those things don't exist in your place. So that's trick number 6. And then trick number 7 is the false consensus effect. This is where we overestimate how much and how many people agree with our perspective or our opinion or what we've heard. People assume that their own viewpoints are what most people think, even when there's no evidence to support that. People project, their own experiences or their own reactions onto other people, and we assume that the people are reacting the same way to the same thing the way that we do. And they're shocked when other people don't care about it as much or at all as they do. This is classic and chronic in church world. Everyone wants to change the service time. No one likes this. Everyone's saying that. And that can make us panic. And change and pull the choices and redo everything. I was at a church once where the boss was classic for this. People would say, everyone hates the new thing. And so we just can it. And we'd go back and we'd go to the old way. And so maybe you can already hear it, right? But we didn't let mere exposure do its thing. But then I would go talk to the person who told the boss everyone hates it, and I'd be like, hey, who else hates it? I'd love to hear their point of view. And turns out everyone was his wife and Cranky Joe at 10:15 who hates everything. And that was it. And you'd go talk to Cranky Joe, and even he, who hates everything, he was like, I actually don't really care, but, he was really like passionate about it, so I just agreed with him, so he'd go away. And we scrapped the whole thing we were doing. And all the great reasons that we had for why we were going to do it and why it would be good and all the careful thought that had gone into it, because one bloke and his wife told us that everyone hated it. When someone tells you that everyone thinks this or all of us hate that, my advice is don't bother challenging them. Just thank them for their opinion. Ask them who exactly they're thinking of, and then go do your own research. Literally, every time that I can ever remember this has ever happened, in my experience, with no exceptions, it's only ever been a very small minority. However, that just might be my own confirmation bias, false consensus effect, and the availability heuristic, all combining to trick me. But I don't think so. So there are 7 of the, I think, kind of key ways. There's lots more. Our brains are tricking us. They're not bad, and they're not doing it on purpose. They're trying to be helpful. They're just clumsy. But if you can be aware of some of those things, then you have more of a chance of skirting around them than if you don't. What we're going to do is, again, spend just a couple of moments, 1, 2, 3. So what is the one thing? What are the 2 maybe kind of blockages or barriers to you implementing? And what are 3 concrete next steps that might help you?